Giotto's The Last Judgement was commissioned by Enrico Scrovegni of Padua, who had purchased a large piece of land in 1300 in the area around the Roman amphitheater known as the Arena. Although several buildings were constructed, the only one that remains today is the chapel in which Giotto's fresco is painted. Patronage played a particular role in the creation of art during this time, and were typically incorporated into pieces to remind viewers who paid for the work of art and to show themselves participating in the narrative. This is evident in Giotto's piece, where at the bottom left we can see Scrovegni kneeling in front of the Virgin and the patron saints and presenting them with a small model of the chapel itself. Giotto's fresco was completed in the year 1306. In accordance with the vision of John the Evangelist, which prophesies the end of the world and the second coming of Christ, guardians of the heaven roll back the firmament. The shining golden walls of the heavenly Jerusalem appear behind it. Christ turns to the blessed and extends his right hand to them in invitation, while his left points to the damned in dismissal. Christ manifests a special concern for the blessed by turning his head and eyes towards them. In Giotto's piece, there is a sense of optimism. He places little emphasis on the hellscape, tending to focus his energy and attention on his depiction of heaven. His hell is a place more of disorder than of excruciating pain. The damned and all the devils, except Satan, are reduced in scale. Giotto's outlook of the Last Judgment seems more serene and assured. Giotto's Christ is scaled larger than the angels and apostles surrounding him. He is central in the piece, emphasizing his religious importance, and is depicted emerging from a golden orb framed by a rainbow mandorla, common in medieval religious imagery. The piece is balanced and even incorporates the Gothic-style window pane in its symmetry. The Day of Judgment marks the final act of the long, turbulent history of mankind, which began with the fall of Adam and Eve and their expulsion from Eden. It is the day when the dead shall rise from their graves, and Christ shall come a second time to judge all men, rewarding each according to his merits. As Christ himself foretold, the elect will enjoy the eternal bliss prepared for them from the foundation of the world, while the damned will be condemned to the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Time will cease and eternity begin. The preparation for this final day was one of the chief concerns of the medieval church. It taught the faithful what conduct would enable them to be numbered among the blessed. It warned backsliders and evildoers of the awful punishment which awaited them if they failed to reform. Thus, the unending torments of the damned were described in lurid details in countless books and sermons, while meditations on the Last Judgment and hell played an important part in various spiritual exercises. The terrors of the final reckoning were intensified by a general sense of its imminence. Nowhere, however, was this chronic anxiety of the age given more vivid expression than in Bosch's imposing Last Judgment triptych in Vienna. Here, across the three inner panels, appear the first and last things, beginning with the fall of man on the left wing. The story recounted in the second and third chapters of Genesis has been placed in a lush garden. In the foreground, we see the creation of Eve, followed by the temptation of the first couple. In the middle distance, they are driven from the garden by an angel. The expulsion of Adam and Eve from Eden is paralleled above by the expulsion from heaven of the rebel angels, who are transformed into monsters as they descend to earth. Bosch thus depicted the entrance of sin into the world and accounted for the necessity of the Last Judgment. Right away, we see a stark difference in the tone and imagery compared to Giotto's piece. Giotto's piece is representative of late medieval and early Renaissance style. Bosch, on the other hand, delivers a piece representing early Netherlandish Renaissance depiction of the Last Judgment. Several noticeable differences prevail. The first is the color palette of the triptych. Bosch used oil paint on wood to create this piece. Oil paint was commonly used by painters in Northern Europe and allowed artists to layer paint over paint, which allowed the colors to present themselves more vividly, unlike the frescoes of the past, which had more pale color tones. The main focus of Bosch's Last Judgment piece seems to be the torture of the damned in the realm of hell. The hellscape encompasses the full right panel and most of the central panel. The scene is full of dark energy, emphasized by the dark browns and reds that make up the hellscape. Bosch highlights the foreground, where we see multiple polymorphic creatures parading about and in the act of mutilating and torturing those who have been damned for eternity. Bosch darkens and scales down the figures in the middle ground, creating the perception of death, enlarging the scene of the hellscape. In the background, Cavernous structures are illuminated by the flames which engulf their interiors. Even in the darkness, faint shadows outline more of the damned being tortured by the demons in hell. Above the hellscape, in a cloud of white light, and seated on a rainbow, emerges Christ. In Bosch's depiction, Christ faces us, the viewer, and acknowledges us with his gaze. He seems to smile, indifferent to the hellish suffering occurring below. In this piece, in fact, it seems that most of the judged have been condemned to live out eternity in hell. Christ is surrounded by his 12 disciples, each individualized and displaying an array of emotion at the unfolding scene. Christ's halo is replaced by golden radiating lines. He raises his right hand to the blessed and lowers the other toward the damned, in a gesture of balance or justice. When viewed side by side, it is apparent that the reasoning toward each depiction of the Last Judgment differed. Giotto's Last Judgment served as a reminder to all that through religious veneration and moral goodness, one could be in God's good graces and join the saints in the realm of heaven. Bosch, on the other hand, emphasizes the torments of hell as a way to persuade his viewers toward a life less endowed with sin, though in a pessimistic sort of undertone, understanding that sin penetrates human existence and we can't escape our fate when living a life of sinful pleasures.